There are two words in the Bible that radically change people's lives. Jesus said these words to fishermen, to tax collectors, to skeptics. He even said these words to a man called Phillip. And these words are perhaps some of the most disruptive he said there. Follow me. You know, Jesus gave no detailed pitch. He didn't give any theological explanation. He didn't have any plan. He just gave an invitation. And this invitation, Phillip heard, he said yes to. So today, as part of our series on transformed people in the Bible, we're looking at Jesus' invitation to Phillip, how it transformed Philip's life, and then kind of what that means to us. So we've got one person, 2 words behind me, and 20 or 25 minutes. So we'll start in John 1:43. So it says, the next day, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, he said to him, follow me. Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from the town of Bethsaida. Philip found Nathanael and told him, we have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. Nazareth, can anything good come from there? Nathanael asked. Come and see, said Philip. When Jesus saw Nathanael approaching, he said of him, here truly is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. How do you know me? Nathanael asked. Jesus answered, I saw you while you were still under the fig tree before Philip called you. Then Nathanael declared, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. Jesus said, you believe because I told you I saw you under the fig tree. You will see greater things than that. He then added, very truly I tell you, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. You know, when we look at Jesus' words to Peter, we see this unknown invitation. To Philip. Philip did not know what he was getting himself into. You know, I think a lot of us would have had questions. I would definitely have some questions here. But you can almost imagine the way that Jesus came up to Philip, like the way that he looked at him, the way that he spoke to him. It almost like answered all of Philip's questions. You know, the questions I would have, like, you know, how long am I going to be following you for? You know, like, how long is this going to go on for? And it's as if Jesus is saying, like, it's forever, Philip. You know, well, where are we going to go? Well, wherever I go, Philip. You know, what will we be doing? It's whatever I do, whatever I tell you, Philip. You know, so I've been thinking about these 2 words for a few weeks now, and you know, it's incredible that Philip walked away from everything he knew in that moment. But like, did he even say yes? You know, was it even a question? It's as if like this invitation for Jesus was so compelling that he just followed him. And you know, whether we meet Jesus today or it's been decades, you know, the invitation is still the same. The invitation for us today is follow him. You know, this is an invitation. It's forever, it's whenever, it's whatever. And I know we know this, but it's just a reminder that he has the plan. We don't know the answers, but he has the plan. And it's a reminder for our community that he has the plan. He knows what he's inviting us into. I once had an unknown invitation that I said yes to and got myself into an interesting situation. So I took a gap year and I worked for a bit. I actually worked at a milkshake shop and got fired, which is another story. But I decided I wanted to go to a church or do some sort of church program. You know, I had a lot of questions for Jesus at that time. I was, you know, a lot of things I wanted to understand and some struggles. And so I was kind of exploring different options. I got connected to a church in the US, and who some friends were connected with, and I was emailing them, and eventually I was like, they were like, just come out here, just come out and spend some time with us. And I said, well, what will I be doing? And in like a kind of brilliant American way, they were just like, well, just come out and we'll figure it out. So they'd said in this thing, like, you can come and live at the men's house, just come out. So I was 19, I was pretty naive. I just booked a flight to Seattle, and I flew all the way to America with very, very little understanding of what I was doing. And when I arrived, they said that someone would be there to meet me. But Seattle at night, no one was there. So I was just standing there, and those baggage things were just going round and round, just waiting. And I thought, God, I've flown all the way across the world to America, and on day one, this journey has sort of ended. Luckily, this guy did arrive, and he took me to what was the men's house. Now, because of my lack of questions or research, it was actually a halfway house for recovering drug addicts and literally bank robbers. And so I arrived that night, and I had a roommate. This guy could have crushed me with like his little finger probably. And it was just this real immersion into a different life from what I'd known. But during that time, I met Jesus in a whole new way, and these people were probably the most generous, loving people I met. It wasn't the journey I expected. I didn't know what the invitation was going to entail, but God had a plan. And so in choosing to follow Jesus, like we don't know what's going to happen, but Philip got to see something amazing, didn't he? Jesus knew the plans for him, and by following Jesus, he got to witness miracles, which we'll see in a sec. He got to see Jesus' teachings. He got such an amazing experience. Imagine if he decided not to follow Jesus. And imagine if we don't. What would we miss out on? So it's not just an unknown invitation, it's also a radical one. In verse 43, it says, finding Philip. Jesus found Philip. What would have that been like? Imagine Jesus coming up to you in a crowd and, a fisherman. This was a radical reversal. In Jesus' time, if you wanted to follow a rabbi, you had to really prove yourself. You had to do a huge amount of learning of the scriptures, learn the whole Torah, learn more of the scriptures. By 17, only the best students would then progress to the next stage of training. And then only after that would they then even get a chance to go to a rabbi and ask that rabbi, like, can I follow you? And even then, they might not have been chosen. But with Philip, Jesus flipped this model completely. He didn't wait for Philip to apply. He went and found him and extended that invitation. And this is incredible. Like, if you think about it, it's a fisherman. Before he'd proven anything, Jesus comes up to him and says, follow me. And, when in that time they were following a rabbi, they were basically totally committed to that rabbi. They would, follow them around and want to become like them. And, this is what Philip got in that opportunity. He got the opportunity to become like Jesus. And one of the things Jesus did was he taught Philip that to become like him, he also needed to live in a different way. So the next time we see Philip in John, it says, John 6, when Jesus looked up, do we have John 6 as the next one? I hope so. There we go. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming towards him, he said to Philip, where should we buy bread for these people to eat? He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, it would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, Gather the pieces that are left over. Let nothing be wasted. So they gathered them, filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. So when I was looking at this, I was asking, why did Jesus ask Philip this question? Because it says, he only asked him to test him. And one of the theories is that Jesus might have asked Philip because, Philip was from this region. He was from Bethsaida in Galilee. He would probably know, the practical realities of, where to buy food, where are the markets, the suppliers. He was a fisherman. So Jesus asked him to test him. He was the guy who knew. And it's almost like a reversal from the earlier question. I think it's because Jesus really wants to show him again that this time, even though he was qualified, the first time Jesus comes to him, he's not qualified to follow, but Jesus is being radical. This time, I think he's saying, look, Philip, even though you are qualified, even though you probably can figure out where we could buy some food, it's just not going to be enough. There's just not enough human resources for this requirement. You're going to need divine provision. And if you look later at Philip's life, all these ways that Jesus uses him, he had to learn on that journey that the only way to do the work of Jesus, the only way to really follow him is to trust him that he will provide, that he has the resources. Philip became this key figure in spreading the gospel, perhaps because he learned that there is no human solution. We need Jesus. So after a bit of time when I was in America, I realized that I should have a Bible of my own. I brought a Bible with me from that I had with my parents, but I kind of felt like I really need my own Bible, something that I can have. And so one evening I was at this men's house, and I wrote down on my hand, "Get a Bible." And sitting across the room from me was this guy. I think he actually might have been a bank robber, and he came back into the room, and he gave me this Bible. This is actually an incredible moment in my life, and he said, "I feel like this Bible's for you, from God." And I still can't quite believe it, actually, but this Bible's been with me ever since, and it's just an amazing reminder that Jesus will provide whatever we need in that journey. We can trust him to follow him. And Philip didn't keep this invitation to himself. He gave it to others. So, what is the first thing Philip did after meeting Jesus? If we look at the verse, he went and found his friend Nathanael, and he went to tell him. So it says, Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from the town of Bethsaida, which is a town in Galilee. Philip found Nathanael and told him, "We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." "Nazareth, can anything good come from there?" Nathanael asked. "Come and see," said Philip. So I think the dichotomy of this message is that it's for everyone. Jesus wants everyone to follow him, but he also wants our friends and our community. They were friends. It says in John 1, Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from Bethsaida. So 3 of them are from this small fishing region in Galilee. And Nathanael was from Cana in Galilee, so same region. And in John 2, which is the next chapter, that's where Jesus does the miracle for the wedding in Cana in Galilee. So they were all connected in some way. And a third of the disciples, just here, a third of them were likely connections. Philip doesn't actually explain that much to Nathanael. So he gives him a bit of history. He says, well, look, Moses wrote about this guy, and the prophets also wrote about him. Then he gives him a bit of a location where this guy's from Nazareth. He says there's a connection. He's the son of Joseph. But that's basically what we see. That's all that he gives him. It's not much. Nathanael is unsure, and all that Philip says is, come and see. It's like this simple, follow me, and then come and see. You know, he doesn't say much, but he does make it clear what to do. We have to make it clear to our friends what to do. So he gives an invitation for Nathanael to personally experience Jesus for himself. And, you know, that's actually often all we need to do. You know, we don't necessarily have to convince people. We just have to invite them to come and meet Jesus. And, you know, Nathanael's skeptical. He's basically questioning Nazareth. Philip's invitation prompts him to investigate, and he goes and sees. You know, I think we can sometimes feel, I can definitely feel like, oh, I don't have the answers. I'm not quite ready. I don't really know what to say to people. But maybe Philip didn't really know. And maybe he was just like, well, look, just come and see. So I think the point here is also when we give an invitation to people to know Jesus, we have to point them in the right direction. Like we have to give them the right details. You know, so Philip points them to Jesus. It's a bit like if you get invited to a wedding, people are like, come to my wedding, but there's no address for where it is. It's like, well, that's nice, but where do I actually go? So, you know, the come and see part is really the address, and Jesus is the location. You know, come and see, this is where you have to go, and Jesus is that location. So, I was once going to a close friend's wedding, and in the build-up to this wedding, you know, some messages around, look, a bunch of the guys are going to get together to, you know, get dressed, you know, in the morning of the wedding, you know, spend some time together. And, you know, I was like, oh, you know, that's really nice, but I was traveling with a friend, so I thought, look, guys, thanks a lot, but like, I'll just see you at the church. So I went with my friend, and on the way, I was getting phone calls, and people were like, Nick, where are you? Are you coming? And I was like, yeah, guys, I'll meet you at the church. Like, I'll be there at the church. So that's a bit strange. So we get to church, and as far as I remember, like we were pretty late to actually even getting to the church. So we arrive at the church, and walk in, big church. And one of the guys, I'm paraphrasing, but basically one of the guys someone comes up to me and is like, Nick, what are you doing? You're an usher. Come and sit with us at the front. So I'm still unclear as to whether my friend ever asked me or whether I just totally missed the invitation. But I was meant to be an usher at this wedding, and I arrived almost late. So I felt like a complete lemon for basically the rest of the day. Like it was not the best feeling. But you know, the point is, we have to be clear with people to come and see Jesus. Otherwise, they're not going to know how to fully accept the invitation, and they're going to miss out on an amazing opportunity. So we have to tell people to come and see, like Philip. And finally, this invitation is not always easy. It's simple, but it is hard. You know, to truly respond to follow me, like it is simple. You know, you see Philip respond, like it is simple, but it is hard, isn't it? It's hard to stay close to Jesus, you know, to read about him, to listen to him, to speak with him. And, you know, religion actually makes things complicated, which makes things easy, you know. If you have more rules, more frameworks, more busyness, you know, it can make it easier to stay at a distance. You know, Jesus didn't say, follow a program, follow this class, follow this person, do what you want. He said, me. He didn't stay at a distance. He said, stay really close. Jesus is asking for all of us, all of our lives. That is not always easy. He's asking for all of us, every part of us, to follow him. And if you think about it, Philip followed Jesus. He followed him through that miracle where 5,000 people were fed. He followed him, would have seen incredible things, but he would have also seen that suffering of Jesus. He would have potentially seen Jesus go to the cross, seen Jesus die. We are all called to, I suppose, a cross in a sense. We have to give up on other invitations. And it says, though, in John 20, it says, then the same day at evening, being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut, where the disciples were assembled, fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood in the midst and said to them, peace be with you. When he had said this, he showed them his hands and his side, and then the disciples were glad when they saw the Lord. So it doesn't say Philip's name here, but it does say the disciples. So it's fairly safe to assume that Philip was there. He'd followed Jesus through this whole journey, through all these trials, but he also got to see the resurrection. He stood in the presence of Jesus. And that's the paradox of follow me. It's we have to go through sometimes loss and suffering, but also we gain life forever. And most importantly, we can trust in his leadership for our lives. We can trust Jesus' leadership for us. So I suppose finally, we are still talking about this fisherman in June 2025 in our own coastal town. We're still talking about this guy, Philip, who was just a fisherman from Bethsaida. He got to have the most amazing life. His life was totally transformed by Jesus. And it wasn't because of those two words, but it was his response to them. So, Joe, do you want to come up? So I suppose the invitation is still the same today as for all of us. And it's follow me today and tomorrow. And then we get to tell other people to come and see.